The wind drifted over the plains like a tired lullaby, cool and persistent, brushing against the cracked earth and whispering softly through the skeletal trees. In that lonely, sun-bleached land, Elias Granger rode slow and quiet, not because he was in a hurry, but because love had taught him not to be. His horse, Cinder, a dun-colored mare with a gentle gait, moved with the rhythm of someone who knew the land by memory. Elias didn't rush her, he never did. There was no destination that mattered more than the journey, not anymore. Love had taught him that, too. 7 days had passed since Elias last spoke to another soul. Not from bitterness, not from fear, but from a silence he wore like a second skin, an armor shaped by grief. Wrapped in the tender remnants of love that refused to fade. His home was a shack more memory than shelter. A crooked spine of salvaged wood and stone nestled beside Greer's Creek. It leaned tiredly beneath cottonwoods, their leaves whispering stories of a time before everything changed. The rocking chair on the porch still creaked when the wind pushed it. Clara's chair, and sometimes, in the still of night, Elias would sit in it and remember the way she rocked it. Arms cradling the child they had barely known. Clara. Her name lingered on the edge of everything Elias did. In the curve of the trail he carved to the barn. In the way he brushed his fingers across the cradle she once sang over. His love for her was not gone. Just transformed. Woven into the land. Into the things he refused to abandon. Her memory was a presence. Not a ghost. A soft light in the endless dusk of his days. She'd been warmth in a cold world. Clara, where the war had carved hard edges into Elias. She had softened them, slowly, like water on stone. He remembered the first time she touched his hand. How he'd almost pulled away, too used to pain disguised as kindness. But she had held on gently. Steady, patient, that was love, wasn't it? Not fireworks, not storms, just the choice to hold on. They'd had a little girl. Just once, just briefly. She'd never cried. Fever came like a thief in the night. And by morning, Clara's skin was cold and their baby's breath never came. Elias buried them both beneath the big oak behind the barn. He carved Clara's name into the bark with a shaking knife. There was no ceremony, no headstone, just his knees in the dirt. And his love, raw and helpless, mingled with tears he saved for darkness. Every morning after, he woke because Clara would have wanted him to. He tended the land not because it gave him joy, but because she had loved the smell of turned soil, the shape of tomatoes on the vine. Every evening he lit the lamp, not out of necessity, but because he could still hear her hum as she walked through the house at dusk. And he couldn't bear for that hum to vanish. The townsfolk of Dry Hollow had once respected Elias. Now they feared him. A man alone too long becomes legend or cautionary tale. They whispered that the war had shattered him. That Clara's death had driven him into madness. They said he talked to the ghosts. But what they didn't understand was this: when love is deep enough, it never leaves. It just changes shape. And Elias did talk to Clara. When he set the table for one. When he repaired the roof she always worried over. When he folded the baby's old blanket and laid it gently beside the cradle. Love doesn't disappear. It settles in. Quiet, steady, waiting. Some nights he sat by the fire and dreamt of her. Not as a spirit, but as a memory warm enough to melt the ache in his chest. He'd see her in white, spinning barefoot on the porch, laughter rising like song. Sometimes, the baby would be in her arms, eyes bright, hair dark, reaching. He never touched them in those dreams, just watched, because even in his deepest love, he knew they belonged to the past, and he was the keeper of that love in the present. The land was hard, and Elias's face bore its story. Sun-hardened, lined with years, beard gone to gray, but his eyes, once green like spring creek grass, held love still. Dull to strangers, yes, but sharp when they caught the light, like the flicker of something still alive. That morning, as the wind stirred dust and whispers, Elias didn't ride toward Dry Hollow or away. He just rode. Love had no map, no schedule, only a compass that always pointed back to where his heart had once rested, in Clara, in the child they never named. Love lived in that silence, in the slow walk to the creek, in the feel of Cinder's breath, warm and steady against his palm. It lived in the creak of that old rocking chair, the way it moved all on its own when the wind came right. And Elias, though broken in ways that didn't mend, carried that love with reverence, not as a burden, as a vow. Blank. Underscore. Blank. The wind carried sorrow across the plains that day, a soft, hollow sound that whispered of grief and silence. Elias Granger rode slow, Cinder's hooves tapping out a patient rhythm on cracked earth, the rhythm of a man in no rush because he had nowhere to go, and nothing left to lose. Yet even in that emptiness, love, unseen and unspoken, stirred, waiting. The sun was rising behind gray clouds when Elias saw it, a dark shape in the shallow valley near the edge of his property, swinging gently beneath a tree. From a distance, it looked like death, and for a man who had known death intimately, he nearly passed it by. But love, quiet and steady, wouldn't let him. Cinder stopped on her own, ears flicking, body tense. Elias felt it in his chest, a tightening like a rope pulling him forward. He dismounted, rifle slung across his shoulder, boots crunching dry soil as he approached. And then he saw her, a girl, hanging by her wrists, bound with rough rope, a child, her head bowed, dark hair hiding her face. Her small frame was limp, clothes torn, blood dried across her skin, and around her neck, a sign soaked in red, "White man. Don't forgive." Elias didn't breathe. The wind stopped. For a long moment, he just stood there, heart hammering in a chest that had not known urgency in years. Apache. Even before the war, he'd seen the hatred, settlers and tribes blaming one another, the truth buried beneath blood and dust. But this wasn't justice. This was cruelty. This was someone's child strung up like an example. And it cut Elias deeper than he expected. Because love does that. It sees suffering and refuses to look away. He moved closer. Her chest stirred, barely. A rise. A fall. Still alive. Elias looked around. No footprints. No riders. Whoever had done this was gone. The easy choice would have been to ride away. Let the land claim her. Let silence speak for him again. But silence had once taken Clara, and their baby, and he had never forgiven himself for all the things he hadn't said. All the moments he hadn't reached out. He stepped forward, pulled out his knife, and cut the ropes. She collapsed like cloth, a soft thud that made his jaw tighten. A low moan escaped her lips. Fever clung to her skin, heat radiating off her like a warning. Her lips were cracked. She was so light in his arms, too light. Starved, abandoned. He cradled her close, whispering, "God help me," because love, real love, demands action, not answers. He lifted her onto Cinder's saddle, walked beside the mare back to the cabin, checking over his shoulder every few minutes, not from fear for himself, but fear that someone would come for her again. At the cabin, he carried her inside, laid her on Clara's old cot, the same one where his wife once nursed dreams that never came true. He bathed the girl's wounds, cleaned her wrists, spooned broth into her cracked lips, one trembling mouthful at a time. She never opened her eyes. That night, Elias sat beside her, the fire painting shadows on the walls, the room heavy with a past that never left. But in that moment, as he watched over a broken child he didn't know, he felt something stir in the silence, something like love. Not the soft kind, not the romantic kind, the kind forged from sacrifice, the kind shaped like Clara's hands, always doing, always giving, the kind that says, "You matter. You live." He didn't ask her name. Didn't need to, not yet. He spoke gently, like he was afraid to break her. "You're safe now," he said, though he wasn't sure it was true. But he meant it. She didn't speak, just stared, her eyes full of fear. Not of death, but of being hurt again. Elias saw it, and he didn't look away. Because love doesn't flinch when it meets pain. It holds its gaze. Over the next days, he left water where she could reach it, left food close but not too close, sat quietly by the fire, never pressing, never rushing, just waiting, letting her know she wasn't alone. And love grew, not in grand gestures, but in little ones, the way he changed her bandages while she pretended to sleep. The way he turned his back so she could feel safe enough to eat. The way he let silence be its own kind of language. He saw her behind the chair, gripping the fireplace poker like a weapon. Her body rigid, eyes wild. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, voice soft, steady. Love didn't need her trust right away. It just needed her to live. Each day, a little closer. Each night, a little less afraid. She sipped water. She sat by the fire. She looked out the window at the world that had almost taken her. And finally, she spoke. "Nayland." It was barely a whisper, but it struck Elias like thunder. He didn't smile. He didn't cry. He just nodded. "That's a strong name." And he meant it. In the days that followed, the name echoed in the cabin like a promise. Nayland. She had a name. She had a place. She had someone who would not ride away. And though love could not undo what had been done to her, it could be there now. In the warmth of firelight. In the offering of food. In the space made sacred by choosing not to walk past. Because love doesn't always look like roses or rings. Sometimes, it looks like a man kneeling in the dust, cutting down a child from a tree, carrying her home, feeding her spoon by spoon, speaking softly to a girl who didn't yet know what safety sounded like. But one day, she would, because Elias Granger had loved once. and lost everything. And yet, somehow, when he saw Nayland hanging in the valley, something inside him remembered what Clara once told him. Real love doesn't end, it just waits for the next place to begin. And maybe, just maybe, it had begun again. Blank. Underscore. Blank. The days unfolded like petals. Slow and fragile, each moment a quiet test between Elias and Nayland. There were no grand declarations. No sudden shifts. Only the gentle, patient language of care. And in that quiet space, love began to grow, not soft and romantic, but fierce and rooted in survival. Like two trees leaning into each other against the wind. Nayland didn't speak again after sharing her name. She moved like a shadow. Always watching. Always ready to run. Elias never tried to close the distance. He understood fear. He understood how wounds needed room to breathe. And love, he knew now, was not something you pressed into someone's hands. It was something you offered and let them decide to reach for. Each morning, he placed food where she could see it. Never too close. A slice of bread, a bowl of broth, a few pieces of dried fruit. She took it only after he turned away. After enough silence passed to let her decide it was safe. He saw her watching him when she thought he wasn't looking. Saw her eyes follow the way he moved around the cabin. Every step he took, every drawer he opened, every moment he turned his back, it was all a kind of choreography. A dance between broken souls. She never smiled, never softened, but she stayed. And that, Elias knew, was its own kind of love. A hesitant kind, a bruised kind. One morning, while fixing the fence, Elias heard the softest creak from inside. When he stepped in, the cot was empty. A flare of panic rose. Then he saw her, crouched behind the rocking chair, holding the fireplace poker like a blade. He froze, slowly raised his hands. "I ain't gonna hurt you," he said, voice low and steady. She didn't move, didn't blink. He took a step aside, giving her space, leaving the room open between them. "You're safe here," he said again. "No one's going to touch you again." She hissed a breath, not words, just disbelief. Elias saw it in her face, the cut at her lip, the storm in her eyes. She looked less like a child than a creature who'd been hunted and barely survived. Still, he made tea, sat it on the floor between them. Not near her, just near enough. Hungry? No answer. He turned away, busied himself with the fire. When he glanced back, she was crawling forward, fingers curled tight around the cup. She sipped once, twice, then backed away, vanishing behind the chair again. But she drank it, and Elias said nothing. Love didn't need to celebrate every victory. It just kept showing up. Day after day, this became their rhythm. He would work, she would watch. He would leave food, she would eat. Sometimes he found her asleep in the chair by the fire, arms wrapped around her knees, head tilted toward the flame. Sometimes, he thought he heard her whisper things in a language he didn't understand. He didn't ask, he just listened. On the 5th day, he found her at the window, curtain drawn just an inch, staring out. Her face looked older somehow, worn, as if she'd aged years in just days. He didn't speak, just stood by the fire, letting the warmth speak for him. After a while, he pulled a chair across the room and sat with a quiet grunt. I had a daughter once. He said. She didn't turn. Fever took her. Before she got a chance to see much of this world. He saw her glance back. Just once. Then, a whisper. Barely there. Nayland. He sat straighter. That's a strong name. She looked away. After that, something softened. Just slightly. Meals began to happen at the table. Not always. Not completely. But enough. He brought out an old cloth doll, Clarice. Worn and stitched. The mouth nearly faded from years of love. He placed it gently in front of Nayland and stepped back. She stared at it. Her face was stone. But her fingers reached out. 2 fingers. Tentative. Brushing the fabric like it might vanish if touched too hard. Her shoulders trembled. She didn't cry. But she held it. That night, Elias sat by the fire longer than usual. Watching her sleep, she clutched the doll to her chest. And in her stillness, something like peace found the room. He realized, in that moment, that love was not always loud. It was not shouting across mountains or charging into storms. Sometimes it was quiet, a presence, a steadiness, a man making tea for a girl who wouldn't look him in the eye. A child clutching a doll, still afraid but no longer running. Love, in their broken cabin, was a chair placed just far enough to not feel threatening. A meal left on the table without demands. A fire kept lit, not because it was cold, but because someone else might need the warmth. Elias didn't speak much, but he spoke in gestures. And slowly, Nayland began to answer in her own way. One evening, he found her folding one of Clara's old quilts. Not perfect, not clean, but she handled it carefully, with respect, as if understanding the weight of what had been lost. He didn't ask why, didn't praise her. He just said, "Thank you." And she nodded, just once. That was love, too.